This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Have you been thinking about therapy? Have you been trying to get in to see a therapist? Have you found that a lot of therapists that you've been recommended to have either closed books or they've got a really long waiting list? Sometimes months. If you're lucky, it's a couple of weeks. Now, what if there was an alternative that gave you quicker access and at your convenience? So when starting to think about looking for a therapist, try BetterHelp. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient and flexible to your schedule needs. So just fill out the brief questionnaire and get matched with a registered therapist. You can also switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So get moving with therapy and visit BetterHelp. BetterHelp.com/Gunter today will give you 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gunter, GUNTER.
Listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host. Now in today's episode, I want to look at a very harsh reality that I feel can't go untreated any longer. So what am I talking about? Well, since the beginning of 2024, statistics have revealed that there's a disturbing trend in our society, in Australia in particular, although we're not the only ones with this problem. I can go globally and point this out, and you'll understand in a minute why. And this particular trend this year is that one woman is now killed every 4 days. Now, that's not a number that I want you to dwell on. What it is a devastating testimony to the sickness of our society. So in this episode, I'm going to take a deep dive into the reasons behind this trend, how it affects our lives, and what we need to do about this to put an end to it. So let's talk about the magnitude of this. Now, I'm not going to make this tedious and roll out a whole bunch of statistics, and then people are going to come back and, dispute the statistics and, how those statistics were put together. What I actually want to do is that I want you to look at this from an emotional point of view, from a relational point of view. These statistics, this digit is a personal tragedy. It's a community that's left in shambles and a family that needs to grieve the loss of a loved one. And as I said before, the phenomenon is not just confined to Australia, it is in fact universal, with no country immune to the problem. Now, in this umbrella of intimate partner violence rests a number of other issues. It includes domestic abuse, it includes sexual assault, and most importantly, everyday patriarchy. We have seen under that umbrella horrendous abuses of women. And it's interesting that it's not just violence per se, it's not just a physical act, it's the social and emotional types of violence that need to be included in this, where we're really talking about fundamental boundary violations. Now, if you remember in one of the podcasts, I talked about territory, personal territory, and the fact that each individual in their relationship with another individual needs to respect that person's personal territory and the boundaries that they set. And I guess in many respects, killing is the ultimate boundary violation. But usually that's preceded by a whole host of other boundary violations. And those boundary violations begin small and escalate. And sometimes they take years to escalate, sometimes they happen very, very quickly. So, in one of the sessions that I had with someone recently, they actually asked me, because they're very concerned about this as well. It's a younger man, probably mid-20s, who really wants to, in a sense, make a difference himself in terms of what's going on. And he asked me point blank, can we predict intimate partner violence? Now, that's a really interesting question. And in fact, if we go back, a few decades, the answer would have probably been no, not really. But that's not true. In fact, when we look at the research, the statistics, and so on, and the patterns and the profiles, we need to accept that despite being, a complex issue with multiple factors influencing its occurrence, it's not impossible. And so researchers and practitioners have been aiming to identify key risk factors that can help in assessing the likelihood of such violence. Now, again, let me reinforce that we're not talking just physical violence. We're talking about the patterns of behaviour that constitute territorial boundary violations. So, one of the things that we can do is sort of a bit like profiling. And, I love watching detective stories and especially forensic stuff. And in it, there's often a team or one person who's really good at putting a profile together, and based on that profile, they catch the perpetrator. So, what are we looking at in this instance? So, first off, the reality is that anybody's past behavior is one of the most significant predictors of future behavior. Individuals who've exhibited abusive and or violent behaviours towards their partner and or others are at a higher risk of perpetrating intimate partner violence in the future. Okay, so really important factor to keep in mind. How the person's behaved in the past has a correlation to see how they're going to behave in the future. Now, some people take an exception to that, but believe me, it is predictable. And I've done a lot of work as a therapist and as a counsellor with both individuals and couples, and especially in couples work where there is, emotional abuse. At some point or another, there is a high probability that emotional abuse goes over the boundary and becomes physical violence. So what's another factor here? Well, we know that certain personality disorders or psychological conditions, such as borderline personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder, have been associated with a higher risk of engaging in intimate partner violence. So, in addition, issues like poor impulse control, severe jealousy, or generally aggressive behaviour in other contexts can also indicate a higher risk. So let's go on to the next one. And this one's really, really important because we have a society that likes to party. So what am I talking about? Well, substance use, especially alcohol and stimulants. I mean, to be honest, my experience of most people who are stoners is they can barely get off the couch. So they actually, are more into peace, love, and mung beans than they are in dominating and controlling from a false sense of bravado, right? And unfortunately, alcohol in the combination dysregulates impulse control and executive function. So I'm not saying that substance use causes intimate partner violence, but it acts as a catalyst in an already violent or volatile situation. Now, the other one, and gets a bit complex. I haven't got the time in this particular podcast to really dive deeply into it. But if you look at the trend in my podcasts, you will see a certain pattern around relationships. So we're talking about relationship dynamics. Now, certain dynamics within a relationship, such as power imbalances, dependency, severe conflict, and or economic stress, contributes to an environment in which intimate partner violence can occur. High levels of conflict and poor communication skills particularly increase the risks. Unfortunately, men are still socialized that if they can't dominate their way in a situation, they'll fight it. They'll become combative. Now, most of us, fortunately, are fairly well regulated. We have good impulse control, we have reasonable executive function. And before anybody gets a bit sort of too caught up in demographics, this is not just a problem amongst the less educated or working class community. This is right across the board. I have worked with professionals who have been perpetrators in their intimate relationship. And most commonly, the pattern that they use is they excuse it for having been triggered. In other words, it's her fault, right? And more often than not, what it was is that he couldn't get his way. She didn't allow ourselves to be, dominated, coercively controlled, and so he lashes out. The other factor that's really, really important, and we're getting into some touchy areas here because, let me be frank. Any culture that is significantly patriarchal and has a distinct attitude, negative attitude, or an attitude that women are not equal to men, increases the risk exponentially. So, what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about things like honor killings, the domination and control of women through all sorts of social and economic factors. So the cultural norms and social attitudes toward gender roles and violence can play a significant role. Many cultures will have a tendency to resort to violence because of this idea of maintaining, dominance, that their status becomes incredibly important. The idea of honor, as misplaced as it is, becomes the driving factor. So you have to, the idea of retribution becomes built into the system. So environments that condone tacitly or otherwise, or don't actively condemn violence against partners, can see higher rates of intimate partner violence. And in those cultures, most of it occurs behind closed doors. And there is a, code of silence by everybody, including women. So another factor in all of this pattern is that stress and external pressures can really, really rock the boat. Financial difficulties, unemployment, significant life changes can contribute to an increased risk of intimate partner violence. Now, stress in itself is not a cause, but it's an exacerbating underlying tension or issue within a relationship that can be the fuse that lights the bomb. Okay, So the last point that I want to make in terms of, being able to profile this is that we need to look for early warning signs. There are very distinct behavioral cues, such as increasing control over a partner's actions, coercive control, isolation from friends and family, verbal threats, uh, and escalating aggression are most definitely early warning signs of potential violence. So, my message to women is if you're seeing any of this, even when it's in an early stage of a relationship, you need to consider whether it is really worthwhile staying in that relationship, or do you need to make sure that you, and if you have a child, are safe. You need to get out. And I'm very clear on that. Okay, so what are we going to do about this? How do we intervene or create some sense of an ability to prevent this? So I'm going to be really blunt here. One of the things that we definitely know from lots and lots of research is that a lot of this starts within the home. Okay, so the first thing is, patriarchal fathers, especially patriarchal fathers who are misogynistic, will usually raise boys that are as, if not more, patriarchal than their dads. So this is a risk factor. So what we need is a capacity to educate men even before they become dads into how to be a good father, right? What sort of role model are you going to be? And if you've got, a history of making misogynistic jokes, if you have a tendency to put women down subtly or unsubtly, then you need to basically step it up. You need to get out there and clean up your act. Now, if, just reading books and listening to people, because there's a lot of stuff in the media, isn't getting your attention, isn't getting you to reflect on your behavior, then you need to seek therapy. Because in a lot of instances, a lot of men who act like that actually come from a family where the father acted like that. So you need to do some, work on yourself in terms of your attachments, your beliefs about roles and relationships. You need to clear out the psychological basement from all the junk that's going to lead you to dealing with women and possibly men who aren't quite like you differently and more aggressively. So at this stage, what I want to invite all you men at, because I'm going to follow this up with next week's podcast, because I want to dive more deeply into what we are going to need to do. So the first cab off the rank, and I'm going to leave you with this one today, is men, we need to work on ourselves. We cannot change society unless individually we actually get up to speed, where not only do we behave well, but we call out other men when they are behaving badly. And that's any disrespectful behavior that other men exhibit. When I looked at the video with Brittany Higgins, one of the things that I saw was Lerman plying her with alcohol and three other guys, or was it two other guys? I can't remember right now, playing the same game. Now, someone should have turned around to Lerman and said, mate, you're out of line. Take your ass out of here and don't do it again. But no, we have a culture of a boys' club that protects assholes like Lerman. It's just unacceptable. And it perpetuates, misogynistic behavior, and it perpetuates the patriarchy in a way which, raises the risk of intimate partner violence or violence towards women in general. And therefore, of course, women are going to want, safe spaces for only women. And, that's another story. At the moment, women are being forced to try and define the definition of woman. Well, let's make it very clear. It's female. and they have a right to feel safe in our society, irrespective of what somebody else wants. Just because you want to be part of that, if you're not that, you need to either get permission or you need to drop it. And I'm very, very clear about that. All right, so heavy topic, but one that's absolutely necessary. So I want to thank you for being part of this absolutely vital conversation. Let's not just talk about transformation, but let's become the transformation. Let me talk to you next time, both by tackling this and by you involving yourself in the existing conversation. And guys, be brave enough to continue fighting for a future in which no woman needs to reside in dread of physical harm. Until next time, this is me signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.guntersvoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.